So, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was one of those kids that grew up with Star Wars when it first came out. I was a little suspicious of the new size of action figure, but once I got to see the toys that Kenner provided and how the toys interfaced with that, I fell in love with the toys. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to grow up and I turned that childhood passion into a lifelong career. And I've been doing this now for I've been dealing with pop culture collectibles, mostly Star Wars non-sport cards, for about 35 years. And 30 of those years, I've specialized in the rocket fire and Boba Fett.
Great, great. That sounds really good. What makes the rocket firing Fed an enduring pop culture Star Wars collectible?
I think a lot of it has to do with the Mandela effect it kind of carries around with it. Kenner did a really good job of promoting the rocket firing feature. It really caught on with the imagination of the kids at the time. And when it didn't get released, I think a lot of those fantasies that kids had going on in their minds of what they would do with it, shooting other Star Wars figures, maybe shooting at your sister, it got folded into false memories. And when I started doing collectible shows, two things would always happen. You'd get someone coming over to you and asking you if you had that little figure that fired the missile. They wouldn't even sometimes call it Boba Fett. They would just say, "Do you have the little Star Wars figure that fired the missile?" And then, of course, you'd have the guy that said, "Oh, he lived across from Kenner and he walked his proof of purchase seals over there and he had one before they changed everything." And it had that little pop culture legend that went along with it, and it persists to this day. I mean, of course, now today we know there were prototypes, but we also know that they never ever were released. Kenner was very certain about that there.
Why were they never produced?
Well, there were a couple things happening. Primarily at Kenner, they couldn't make the toy safe. The original latching mechanism, what we refer to as an L slot, it just basically had a little lever that you push down and latch to the left. And if you pick the figure up quickly, you could accidentally fire the missile. So they didn't think that was safe, and they were already kind of working on a retooling of that mechanism to make it safer. Well, Mattel, another toy company, they were having trouble with their Battlestar Galactica toys. There were children, 10 years old, 12, I think, that were going into surgery because they would shoot the missiles down their windpipe and they were getting into their lungs. And so
Gosh.
what happened is that Kenner was trying to make the toy safe, and the new design wasn't passing their safety measures. Mattel was having trouble with their Battlestar Galactica toys. And then around Christmas, a little 4-year-old boy shoots one down the windpipe, aspirates on it. They find him unconscious. They get the missile out, but he's essentially brain dead. And a few days later, I believe it's New Year's Eve, he passes away.
Wow.
Mattel gets slapped with a massive lawsuit. Kenner hears about that. And from what I'm told, the guy in charge of product integrity, I think it was a Carl Wohan, he calls the engineers and says, "That's it, stop, we're done." And legal department probably would have ended it anyway because, again, they could not make the toy safe. And that's why they were not released. And excuse me a second. And another reason we know they didn't get out there, even accidentally, is that people seem to think Kenner distributed these toys themselves. They did not. They used another company for that. And so nothing was ever shipped over to Maple Plains, which would have been the distribution center that would have sent the toys to the children. Whatever stock Kenner had at the time, and we're not too sure what the numbers are, they were destroyed at Kenner. There was a destroy order. I'm told the forklift picked up the box, put it into a box crusher,
Wow.
and that was it. So
Wow.
that's how we know they didn't get out.
And just curious, Alex, sorry, I have a quick question for Brian. I've heard
Yeah.
there's less than 100 L slots, and then I know you might get into the J slots next, but like how many L slots do we believe to be out there?
L slots, if you consider everything, including the rare pieces, of which there's just kind of one or two known, we figure about 70. But you strip out 10 of those, which are those unique or semi-unique pieces, you've got about 60 L slots. And those are just basically your unpainted first shot, no copyright on the back of the legs. And for people not familiar with what a first shot is, at this stage in the game, they were just trying to test the molds to make sure that they were getting the right pressure in there, that the cavities were being filled out, and that the toy had the right look. This was very early on, and that's why you don't have any copyright on the figures. There was no need to have that at that time.
What makes this particular rocket firing different from any other rocket firing FETs that have come to market today?
Well, this particular rocket Fett is an L slot and it's hand painted. It's one of 5 that have been discovered that were hand painted, and it's in what we call the alternate paint slot. It's what we call an alternate paint scheme Fett. There's 3 of them in that category, and there's 2 that are found in production paint schemes. But of the alternate paint schemes, which makes those so interesting and unique, is each one was painted differently. Like there's one that's all black, there's one that's close to production paint scheme, but they reversed the color of the helmets, and I think there's a little bit of black, red on the back instead of blue. And then this one here is the only one that has this really gorgeous embellishment on this orange embellishment on the back with white accents. And the other ones don't have that orange treatment. And that's what makes this one particularly special. It is, for all practical purposes, a one of one.
I gotta ask because most Star Wars collectors collect a lot of these figures based off of the variations, right? Different
Yes.
screams, no date stamps, different
Mhm.
colors, right? Explain the depth of the provenance related to this rocket firing FET.
Well, if we're talking about the provenance of this particular Fett, I mean, it's got an original, well, of course, it's AFA graded. So, the standard, you've got the CIB certificate in there from Tom Derby. That's pretty standard. But it has a notarized document from Chris Fawcett, who was the gentleman who first discovered this. And I think that's dated 2002. I've also put a document to it as well, trying to memorialize all the different facts about this particular figure, at least whatever would fit onto a one-page document. So it's got a nice paper trail to it. But it's also been featured in a couple books. John Kellerman's Star Wars Vintage Action Figures, which came out around 2003, 2004. And that's been, for many years, considered the hobby Bible. He got into a lot of packaging variations in there. And there was a section in the back that dealt with prototypes, and this, along with other rocket Fett variations, were featured in that book. And then there's Wired Magazine, 2004 edition. They did a feature on John Kellerman's book, so this piece was replicated there. And then a few years ago, there was a book published called Engineering an Empire, and this one's very interesting. These 3 collectors, now authors, they decided to take a different approach to Star Wars collectibles. They wanted to interview the Kenner employees and find out what their lives were like before, during, and after they left the company.
Hmm.
And in that book, they feature the gentleman who actually hand painted this. Um, his name is David Elger. At
Hmm.
least I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's one of those that it's got different pronunciations. But anyway, we know the gentleman who hand painted this figure, and it's prominently featured in that book in his section. There's like about 6 pages, 12 total, front and back, that are dedicated to Dave. And this figure is there from when it was initially discovered.
Wow, that's
So it's got a lot of provenance. Oh, and let's not forget the other one. It's part of the Kearns collection. Now, you
wow.
talk about collectors that want all different variations. Justin Kearns, late 90s, say around 98, 99, calls up and tells me he wants to collect every version of Rocket Fett out there. And I'm like, okay, well, good luck with that. There's 2. There's your L and a J. I mean, all right. Well, darn it, this man goes out and finds 9 different variations. Um, and a lot of the ones that I would tell you are those in that category of unique, semi-unique examples. He had them in his collection. That's where they come from. And this
Wow.
piece was in his collection for a time there. And the photo he took of these is referred to in the hobby as the 9 holy grails in a row. So it's also got that additional step of provenance. You just don't find this with these rocket vets. Normally, what you get is, "Hi, I knew a Kenner employee. Excuse me. It's real, and I'm going to sign a letter saying it's real, and I'll look at it. Tom Derby will look at it,
Yeah.
and we'll say, yep, that looks about right." And you don't ever get this depth of provenance, and so that plus the fact that this piece is a one of one is what makes it so special.
Uh, I wanted to ask you, I know there's L slot and there's J slot. Is
Yes.
there a certain one that you would be more attracted to or more after versus like I know obviously if
Oh.
the J has a higher grade versus an L slot or lower grade. So can you tell me a little bit more about the difference?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a hard one because I mean, it really depends. See, I always prefer rarity myself. I want something that isn't going to come up next week. So, I mean, if I was going to look for, let's just take the J slots there for a moment there. First of all, J slots are engineering pilots. So this is getting very close to what would have been produced. Now, there's about 30 of those out there. So if I was looking for a J, I'd probably, well, that one you guys sold for over $1 million, the one with the bag. There's only 3 of those. There's one out there that's on a card. It's a mock-up card, but it was used for Toy Fair. You have that. Those are probably unobtainable pieces, but if you're going to go for a normal J, I would look for something. I would look less for grade, but I would try and find one that didn't have markings on the feet. There are a few of them that are out there, and that means that they were never used in the testing process. But because most J slots are going to have the markings on the bottom of the feet because they needed to know if it was a control group, they were baking them, they were freezing them, they needed to know exactly what was happening to them. So if I was looking for a J, my first thing would be to find one that was in decent shape that had clean feet. That would be the rarity as far as, for me. And if I'm looking for an L slot, I most certainly would want one of the ones that's painted, and that's something else I should just take a moment here. The J slots are all going to be painted because they were painted by mass because they were getting close to production. The L's are all going to be hand painted. And that's the big distinction between the two. And of course, I would want an L that's painted because then I could get a J slot and I'd have 2 painted figures. Otherwise, what you have is a blue gray figure without copyright that's got nothing there. Now, some
Mm,
people love those.
yeah.
And if you wanted to go for one of those, then you're looking at slot variations. And I don't want to put anybody to sleep in this, so I'll try and keep this short. But there are different slots that are found on the L slot figures. The rare ones have a real heavy slant to the left. And then the more common ones are more squared or rounded off at the top. So if someone said, "Hey, I want a L slot that's an unpainted one," I would say, well, you go for one of those. Otherwise, I would go for one of the painted ones because it makes such a nicer presentation because it's more finished.
Wow. I know Dave actually had a question for you. Dave,
Yeah.
what was the last question you wanted to ask him?
Um, I just had it. When you're talking a little bit about Boba Fett, Brian, like why Boba Fett? Why do you think he just blew up as a character in Star Wars? Why is he so sought after? You have so many other iconic characters, but I guess talk to me a little bit about why Boba Fett, like, is
Yeah,
just such a
I
kind
was
of a
wondering if you're gonna. I was wondering if you're gonna ask that. And I've been thinking about that because I was telling my wife that as a realistically, at the time that character came around, we knew less about him than we did about Darth Vader. You know, I mean, it was a load of BS from Kenobi, but we knew more about Darth Vader than we knew about Boba Fett. In fact,
Mhm.
I think we were introduced to the character by Kenner from the Mailway promotion. We knew he was a villain. He was a threat to the Rebel Alliance, and that was about it. So I think a lot of it had to do with the mystery of the character, the fact that he had that neat armor. I think that's what kind of drew people to that character because in the movies, I mean, he really didn't do all that much. I mean, he was all broody in Empire, and then we're all ready for Return of the Jedi. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, he's dead.
Yep.
Really? Oh, okay. The darn thing burped. I guess he's gone.
Yeah.
And we had
Yeah.
to wait until years later for Attack of the Clones to get a little more backstory. Then finally, with the Mandalorian, we get to see him really kick some butt with that costume. And so it kind of validates all the interest we had in the character before. But I think a lot of it still cycles back to Kenner and that little rocket firing mechanism because I told you how cool this character was going to be on screen. And of course, in Empire, we only get to see him use a blaster. And then Jedi, we get to finally see him use that rocket pack, and then he's gone. So I think Kenner had a lot to do with it personally.
And I think the world really does have a love for Boba Fett that Return of the Jedi ended in 1983, right? And
Yeah,
really
yeah,
Book of Boba Fett didn't come out till 22, right?
yes.
39,
Long
40,
wait.
40 years,
Yes.
and he didn't die in that Snorlax pit.
There were some of us who always thought he didn't. There were some of us who always thought he didn't because I mean he had the armor. I mean, and he's Boba Fett, So I mean, so again, it was we were finally our hope was validated. You know?
Anyway, what is the trajectory of the value of these rocket flying Fets going forward? Since we obviously Golden, we have the highest record right now for our.
Well, yes, and congratulations to you guys. I figured you guys are going to pull about maybe 3/4 of a mil, maybe a mil. Wow, that was impressive. That was impressive. I mean, it's hard to say, but I think what people need to understand is that the values between the ones that are going to normally show up, like your unpainted first shots and some of the more common J slots, are going to differentiate from these pieces which are one of a kind because a person wanting an example like this or your bagged example, uh, this is kind of a one and done. If you don't buy it, your chances of it cycling back around is going to be a while. I mean, the last time this particular example was on the market was 2013.
Wow.
So you're talking about a long gap in between. So I mean, with rare pieces like this, potentially the sky's the limit. When you're looking at the more common ones, which if you don't get them in this auction, you'll find them in another auction. I think the prices are going to be a little bit more constrained because there's no reason to reach for those. It's not a hill worth dying on, basically. But if there's a unique piece out there where you have such a low population, then it's something that if somebody wants it, they really should do something about it because you don't know when the next opportunity is going to come around. And I know with some of these uniquer Fets, they're locked up in collections, and you're not going to be seeing them.
Like in your collection, how many more of these do you have left?
Oh, I've got a couple that are in my collection, and they're gonna either go to my grave or I've talked to the wife about maybe making sure they go into a museum or something, because there's some that are like this. They're very unique and very special.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. Dave, do you have anything else for Brian?
I guess Brian, like just I guess to sum everything up, like if you, I know it's tough, but if you had to say in like 2 or 3 sentences why this Boba Fett, if you're a true diehard Star Wars collector of Kenner or anything Star Wars, really, why do you need to have this specific Boba Fett in your collection, in your opinion?
Well, it's gorgeous. It really of the painted examples out there, even if you want to look at the J slots, I mean, this here has got that beautiful orange in the back. It jumps out at you. It's a gorgeous conversation piece, and because of the level of provenance, the depth of provenance to it, it's something you really can sit down and discuss with another collector or someone who's not familiar with this. You can have a conversation about it and beyond just, oh, here it's rare, it's got this certificate says it's genuine. I mean, there's more to this one here, and that's why I would say this is worth having and chasing.